At 33 years old, David Richard Williams was living in Wamsutter, Wyoming, and running his own business called Chances Are Trucking. The company was known for hauling supplies out to oil rigs scattered across the region, and by all accounts, David was described as a dependable and hardworking individual. Unfortunately, on the evening of November 11, 1980, something went terribly wrong. Around 5:30 p.m., David stopped at a now-defunct bar and service station in Creston Junction, a remote little spot east of Wamsutter. He called his wife from there, telling her he planned to check on an oil rig and would be home late. Sadly, that was the last time anyone ever heard from him. Witnesses saw him leave the station in a brown or tan Chevrolet Blazer, heading south on Highway 789. He was a passenger in the vehicle with a man that was described only as a white male, and to this day, his identity has never been confirmed. The Blazer was reportedly tied to someone named David Barker Jr., who has long been considered a suspect in David's disappearance. The gas station where David made his last call is nothing more now than a shabby sign near a mobile home. The landscape around it is as quiet and desolate as the mystery that has hung over the case for more than 4 decades. David stood between 6'2" and 6'3", weighing about 250 to 300 pounds. He had brown hair, blue eyes, and was last seen wearing jeans, a button-down shirt, cowboy boots, and his wedding band. He had no history of leaving without notice, and those close to him believe his disappearance involved foul play. 43 years later, there was finally a break in the case. In November 2023, hunter Mark Zancanella was tracking a wounded bull elk near Wamsutter in Area 118. As he moved through a sagebrush draw, he caught a glimpse of something pale in the brush. It wasn't the elk, it was a human skull. Zancanella immediately contacted the Sweetwater County Sheriff's Office. Authorities have been tight-lipped about the discovery, confirming only that an active investigation is underway. Detective Sergeant Michelle Hall declined to provide additional details, and Zancanella himself has remained quiet about what he saw. The discovery has sparked a wave of speculation. With 6 unresolved missing person cases in Sweetwater County, there's no shortage of possibilities. But Desiree Tinoco, Executive Director of Missing People of Wyoming, noted the proximity and timing of the discovery and suggested it might very well be David's remains. While the skull hasn't officially been identified, the Sweetwater County coroner confirmed that it belonged to a white male between the ages of 25 and 35, with no signs of trauma or dental work. DNA testing is underway, but no matches have been found in NamUs, the national database for missing and unidentified persons. Whether the remains belong to David Williams or someone else, the find has stirred painful memories and renewed hope. David Richard Williams disappeared on November 11, 1980, and as of May 2025, he remains missing, and this case remains unsolved. Jesokah Adkens was born on May 1, 1984, to Jocelyn and Clayton. At age 17, she was living with a roommate on Cowtayson Road, close to her parents' home in Sooke, a small community on Vancouver Island, British Columbia. And although she had moved in with a friend, she still kept in regular contact with her family, talking to them daily and visiting on weekends. Jesokah loved animals, especially her dog Daphne, and she had dreams of becoming a nurse. She was in the 11th grade at Edward Milne Community School and was described as friendly and social. She was also in a steady relationship. Unfortunately, she got tangled up with a bad crowd and was trying to get her life back on track when she sadly disappeared. On the night of September 26, 2001, Jesokah had dinner with a friend at his trailer. After dinner, she made her way to the bus stop at the corner of Sooke Road and Idlemore Road near Cecinas Elementary School. That's where she was last seen around 9:30 p.m. Her plan was to catch a bus for the short ride back to her apartment, just a little over a mile away. She was going home to feed her dog, but never made it. When 3 days passed with no word from Jesokah, her mother reported her missing. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police then launched what they described as an intensive ground, air, and water search, but they turned up nothing. And after just 5 days, according to her close friend, Tommy Johnston, police gave up. That didn't stop Jesokah's friends, though. They continued searching for more than 2 years, with people coming from all over to help. But all searches turned up empty-handed. At some point, the Vancouver Island Integrated Major Crime Unit eventually took over the investigation. As they continued their investigations, they learned that Jesokah had moved out of her parents' home when she was 14 or 15 and moved in with her friend Clara Johnston, not because her family was abusive, but because she wanted to be with her friends and liked to party. She fell in with a rough crowd, known around Sooke as the Skids. They drank, used drugs, and were often exploited by older men who supplied them with alcohol and drugs. One of those men, known by the nickname No-Nose, was a known drug dealer. Jesokah had told her friend, Tommy Johnston, that she owed No-Nose $80 for cocaine. She said she wasn't using drugs anymore, but still planned to pay him back. However, he has since passed away, and if he had any information about Jesokah's disappearance, he took it with him to the grave. There was also a woman named Polly who joined in on the early searches. She wasn't known to Jesokah's inner circle, but it later came out that Polly, her boyfriend, and another man had reportedly been with Jesokah the night she disappeared. When confronted, Polly abruptly left the search group and was never heard from again. Another strange detail in the case is that Jesokah received a government benefit deposit the day she vanished, but the money was never touched. It's one more piece of evidence suggesting she never planned to run away. Over the years, investigators have worked to track Jesokah's movements and social circles, but with no body, no witnesses willing to come forward, and no solid leads, the case has remained unsolved. Jesokah was described as petite, around 5 foot 5 inches, 88 to 110 pounds, with long, straight blonde hair and blue eyes. That night, she was wearing a black bomber jacket, a Doors t-shirt, jeans, and black running shoes. At the time of her disappearance, she was a well-known face around Sooke and Port Renfrew. She often hitchhiked and associated with people from all walks of life. In 2025, Jesokah's memory was shaken once again when her small roadside memorial near Casinos Elementary was vandalized. Items were ripped out and scattered all the way up to Tim Hortons. Broken glass and garbage were left behind, and friends had to come clean up the mess. The memorial was already set to be moved later that summer due to upcoming construction at the Idlemore intersection, but the vandalism still hurt deeply. Today, the bus stop where she disappeared is gone, and the intersection has changed, but the pain hasn't. Jesokah's friends believe people in Sooke know exactly what happened and that they've kept it to themselves for over 2 decades. 17-year-old Jesokah Adkens went missing on September 26, 2001, and as of May 2025, she remains missing, and this case remains unsolved. Joyner Ondimu was born on June 1, 1981, to Samuel and Jacqueline in Kisii District, Kenya. In 2001, she moved to the United States to join her sister and brother-in-law, who had already started building a life for themselves in Delaware. Joyner quickly became part of the community and was known for being warm, compassionate, and incredibly giving. She worked as a residential counselor for Chimes Group Homes and was also studying to become a nurse at Delaware Technical and Community College. She lived at the English Village apartments with 3 male roommates who were reportedly her cousins from Kenya. While there's no official documentation identifying the roommates, a close friend of Joyner's mentioned this in an interview years later. On February 8, 2005, police were called to her apartment when one of her roommates found her deceased in her bedroom. When officers arrived, they discovered that Joyner had been brutally beaten. She had suffered trauma to the head, and her purse was missing, but robbery didn't appear to be the motive. From the beginning, there were more questions than answers. All 3 of her roommates were reportedly home at the time of the murder, yet they told police they hadn't heard anything. Joyner's best friend, Sarita, said that the apartment walls were thin. You could hear everything from room to room, so the idea that no one heard anything during such a violent attack felt unbelievable to her. The next day, February 9th, word spread quickly through the community. Friends and family gathered at her sister's apartment to grieve, sing spirituals, and share memories of Joyner. The community pulled together, raising funds to send her body back to Kenya so she could be laid to rest in her homeland. Her funeral was held on February 19th. More than 500 people showed up to honor her, a clear sign of how deeply she was loved. 5 months after her murder, police publicly stated that they were pursuing a suspect, a person who was known to Joyner and had since moved back to Kenya. They didn't share a name or many details, but said they were working with officials there to try and locate the person. Unfortunately, that's the last major update in the case. Her good friend, Sarita, then spent the next 10 years working to get Joyner's case listed on the NCC cold case site. There are still so many unanswered questions in the case, and it's hard to understand how all 3 of her roommates could have been home at the time of her murder and not heard anything, especially in an apartment where sound carried easily. And while police haven't shared many details, it's clear the attack was violent and personal. There were no signs of a shooting or stabbing, which suggests she was beaten, something that often points to rage or a personal connection. No one close to Joyner ever mentioned a romantic relationship, so if she was seeing someone, it wasn't widely known. Still, it raises the possibility that the person responsible was someone she trusted, someone she might have let in willingly, or someone who already lived there. Then there's the issue of the person of interest who returned to Kenya. Once a suspect leaves the country, especially without being formally charged, everything becomes more complicated. Investigators have to get international cooperation and fight extradition laws. All of this leads to significant legal delays. Joyner Ondimu was murdered on February 8, 2005, and as of May 2025, this case remains unsolved. Rosa Maria Tapia, who went by Rosie, was born on January 17, 1989, and was one of 5 children in a loving family in Salt Lake City, Utah. At just 6 years old, Rosie was full of energy and joy. She loved music, dancing, and playing Super Nintendo. Her bright spirit and infectious smile lit up every room she entered. In August 1995, Rosie was living with her family at the Heartland Apartments when a horrible tragedy occurred. On the evening of August 12th, she was outside playing at the nearby playground. Later that night, a man brought her back to the apartment, claiming she had been injured on the slide, but Rosie told her sisters she hadn't been hurt, and more disturbingly, she didn't know how the man knew her name. In the early morning hours of August 13th, Rosie's mother, Joyner Tapia, checked on the children around 2 a.m. and saw them all asleep. When she checked again at 5:45 a.m., Rosie was gone. The window was open, the screen had been removed, and there were clear signs of a break-in. Police were immediately called and a search began. Just a few hours later, around 10 a.m., Rosie's body was found in the Jordan River Surplus Canal, about 2 miles from her home. She was still in her pajamas. Investigators determined that Rosie had been sexually assaulted, beaten, and drowned. Her murder shocked the community and devastated her family. Investigators released a composite sketch based on the man who had returned Rosie to her apartment the night before. Over the years, various persons of interest were investigated, but no arrests were ever made, and eventually the case grew cold. In 2017, more than 20 years after Rosie's death, her family partnered with the Utah Cold Case Coalition to reignite the investigation. A $100,000 reward was offered for information leading to an arrest. In 2019, a new composite sketch was released based on updated witness input in hopes of stirring memories or generating new leads. But it was an unusual detail from much earlier in the case that drew new attention. Just days after Rosie was buried in 1995, someone left a Barbie doll on her grave. At the time, it seemed like a touching tribute, but years later, investigators began to suspect the doll might be more than just a gesture of sympathy. The doll, a Sweethearts Barbie manufactured in 1994, stood out after it was discovered that two persons of interest in Rosie's case were known to have a fixation with Barbie dolls. When the case was revisited in 2019, the Utah Cold Case Coalition decided to have the doll tested for DNA using cutting-edge extraction methods. The doll was stored in a buffer solution designed to collect any skin cells left behind by those who handled it. Francine Bardoli of the West Jordan Police Department confirmed that DNA testing is underway, but it's expensive, and the nonprofit coalition leading the effort doesn't have unlimited resources. They've also asked for the public's help. If anyone knows who left the Barbie, or if the person who did is willing to come forward, it could help eliminate or confirm a lead and avoid the need for further costly analysis. Rosie's mother, LaWine, has never stopped fighting for justice. Her daughter's memory is always with her, and she still holds out hope that one day the person responsible will be held accountable. As of now, the results of the DNA testing on the Barbie doll have not been released, but the coalition continues to push forward, committed to solving one of Utah's most heartbreaking cold cases. Tracy Gilpin was born on January 25, 1971, in Kingston, Massachusetts. At 15, her life was full of growing pains. Her parents had recently divorced, and she, her siblings, and their mom had just moved to the tight-knit coastal neighborhood of Rocky Nook. Tracy was struggling in school, dabbling in drugs, and had run away a few times, so her name was familiar to local police. But Tracy's family said she had a huge heart. She was responsible enough to babysit for neighbors, had dreams of being a mom one day, and the kind of teen who could light up a room. Her sister Carrie remembered her as hilarious, full of life, and always putting on shows to make people laugh, especially as her alter ego Karen. On the night of October 1st, 1986, Tracy had just wrapped up a babysitting job and was excited. She'd been paid and planned to attend a house party nearby. She stopped home to freshen up, then headed to the party. Around 10:30 p.m., she left with a few friends, but split off to buy cigarettes at the Cumberland Farms store on Route 3A. There, she used the payphone to call the party host for a ride, but the woman couldn't leave her guest. Another woman offered Tracy a ride, but she declined and chose to walk the quiet road back alone. She left the store at 11:30 p.m., and that was the last time anyone saw her alive. When Tracy didn't come home, her mother wasn't immediately concerned. Tracy sometimes stayed out without warning, but by the next day, friends were calling looking for her, and no one had seen her. By that night, the Gilpins were worried and began searching. Police didn't take the report seriously at first, due to Tracy's history of running off, and felt that she would return. However, 5 days later, when there was still no sign of Tracy, police joined in on the search. Flyers went up in surrounding towns, and near her dad's home in Menomet, there were a few reported sightings, but nothing panned out. Then, on October 22nd, a woman picking flowers in Miles Standish State Forest made a horrifying discovery. In a shallow grave near the edge of the woods lay Tracy's decomposed body, partially clothed and hidden under leaves. Her skull had been crushed by a 73-pound rock, causing her face to be unrecognizable. Tracy's mother had to identify her by a piece of jewelry she was wearing. Investigators would ultimately use her dental records to make the official identification. Her death was ruled a homicide by blunt force trauma to the head. Her body had been found 11 miles from where she was last seen, and investigators believed she had been driven there. They also theorized that due to the way her body was placed so close to the road, that her killer wanted her to be found. Tracy's sister, Carrie, said there was no way she would have gotten into a car with a stranger. But Tracy was known to hitchhike, so maybe she did accept a ride from someone familiar, or maybe something went terribly wrong after what seemed like a safe ride home. The case quickly stalled, with little evidence remaining after weeks of exposure to the elements. There wasn't much for police to go on. Then, in 1990, another Kingston girl, 13-year-old Melissa Benoit, went missing. Her body was discovered in her neighbor Henry Meinholz's basement. He had a disturbing history and admitted to molesting hitchhiking teens. Rumors swirled that he might have killed Tracy too, but DNA cleared him. Plus, he wasn't even in Massachusetts at the time of her death. Unfortunately, Tracy's case went cold until 2017, when her family raised the reward to $25,000 in hopes of sparking new leads. Just 2 months after Tracy's father died in early 2018, a tip came in. The caller said Tracy had shown up at a second party the night she disappeared, hosted by a man named Michael Hand, who had never been mentioned in the case before. Hand grew up in Kingston and was living there in 1986, but had since moved to Troutman, North Carolina. Investigators traveled there to speak with him in March 2018. At first, Hand claimed he barely knew Tracy, but when asked for a DNA sample, his story changed dramatically. Hand gave a confusing account involving himself, Tracy, and Henry Meinholz. He claimed to have followed Henry and Tracy to the forest and was coerced into touching the murder weapon. He later told his pastor that he had dropped the rock on her head accidentally, he said. 2 days after his initial interview, Hand was arrested and charged with Tracy's murder, kidnapping, and attempted sexual assault. Since 2018, Michael Hand has remained in custody without bail, but his trial has been delayed multiple times due to the pandemic and legal complications. DNA from the crime scene didn't match Hand. A judge ruled that his statements to police were coerced and inadmissible, and in 2024, the Massachusetts Appeals Court also threw out his alleged confession to his pastor, citing that he was emotionally distressed and influenced by the prior interrogation. The case against Hand has been weakened by these rulings, and his defense team continues to fight for his release, arguing that there's no physical evidence tying him to Tracy's murder. Prosecutors, meanwhile, are still weighing their options. They say there are still other statements from Hand that might be used in court, some allegedly made to fellow inmates, but time is running short. Tracy was murdered on October 1st, 1986, and as of May 2025, Michael Hand remains behind bars awaiting trial. Whether this case finally reaches a courtroom or ends in yet another legal stalemate remains to be seen.